Talk about that.
Matthew.
Oda is I'm not James Yeko.
So, Prof, you're here, right?
Yes. Morning, Prof.
How are you?
Oh, I can't hear you. Am I doing something wrong?
Can you hear?
Am I muted?
Okay. I'm not muted. I am not muted.
Oh, okay. Sir.
How are you doing?
Àlàáfíà ni sir, ẹkújọ́ mẹ́ta. Family nǹkan sir.
Everybody is doing fine, and yours?
We are pretending, sir.
It doesn't show.
Yeah. Thanks for the honor and the privilege. I really appreciate it. Sir.
It is really my honor. So yeah.
Prof, sorry to interrupt. Could you please rename yourself so questions don't come to me? I didn't write the book.
So what do I do? How do I change my name to my proper name?
Yeah. I think you just click on the participants' name and name around somewhere there.
No, we can help. We can help.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Please do it.
I'll just step to the background and thanks everybody, Vicky, Adelakun, and I mean it's
Hi,
great
Vicky.
to have you around.
How are you doing?
Auntie Reofe, Auntie Grace.
Thank you.
So,
Hello.
yeah.
Hi.
So, Professor Elesom, it's great to see you, sir. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure meeting you too.
Yeah.
Professor Falayan, how are you doing, sir?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Professor Olabiodun, Professor Adelakun, Professor Brennan, Professor Adeniyi, Professor Afolayan. It's my pleasure meeting all of you, and welcome to this wonderful panel.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
Oh, good morning.
Oh, well. Depending on
I'm in Lawrence, Kansas now.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. President, continue.
No, I was just going to say that my role is basically ended since you're here as chair, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to follow up on that, my role is also very limited. I'm here to be the timekeeper to chair this session. Again, I welcome everyone for agreeing to be on this panel. And anyone who is familiar with Professor Obadare's work knows that there is no more erudite and more authoritatively illuminating scholar on the dynamics of religion-state relations in Nigeria and the pressures and the contradictions generated by that relationship that Professor Obadare, as he announced in several of his works in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, that his plan is to write 3 books on the rise and prominence and dominance of Pentecostal faith in Nigerian socio-political space. He has produced 2. We all know about the first one, the Pentecostal Republic, where he argued forcefully that we cannot understand the nature of the current Nigerian political dispensation without its connection to the Pentecostal faith and the powers and the interactions between various sectors of that movement and the Nigerian state. This is a sequel to that book, where he also wants to, where he has argued that we cannot also understand the way in which Pentecostal movement has asserted its hold on the Nigerian politics without the role played by the agency of the pastors. And I'm not going to do any review or make any elaborate comments on that argument. But of course, as we all know, there are two major forces that he looked at in this book, the intelligentsia and the pastorate class. And the demise, or perhaps the eclipse of one and the rise of the other, is at the heart of his analysis. So I want to explain the format of the presentation. I will just go by the order in which the names appear on the program. Professor Abimbola Adelakun will go first, followed by Professor Grace Adeni Ogun-Yakin. Professor Adelakun is at University of Texas in Austin. Professor Ogun-Yakin, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrongly, at Queen's University in Canada. Professor Adeshina Folayan at University of Ibadan, then followed by Professor Vicky Brenner at University of Vermont, and then last but not the least, Professor Kumpila Beodon at University of Ibadan. Each of you will have up to 10 minutes. You don't have to exhaust that time slot, but I will employ us to please keep to time so that Professor Obadare can have time to offer join there to your responses. I will pause now and then invite Professor Abimbola Adelakun to make her presentation.
Sorry, good morning, Prof. Thank you very much. I'll go straight to the point. And so I will not have to spend more than 10 minutes. Hopefully, I will skip a few introductory paragraphs and just God help me to keep to time. So written in the delightful prose, Dr. Ebenezer Obadare is well known for Pastoral Power, Clerical State, masterfully dissects the historical and political shuffles that have enabled the man of God to slide into the position previously occupied by the man of letters. In Obadare's chronicle of the fall from grace of the Nigerian intellectual class, he astutely locates the moment where their stars began to dim in the socio-political firmament. He perceptively narrates how the military government that rules Nigeria at several junctures co-opted the intelligentsia into their administration and corrupted them with money and power. Having demystified them and self-serving, also proceeded to discard them. Their use and abuse culminated the ongoing crisis of intellection in today's Nigeria, and neither these intellectuals nor the ivory towers which they metonymize have recovered. Gingerly stepping into the vacuum created by their diminishing Pentecostal pastors, some of whose university training and attainment of the highest academic degrees simultaneously confer charismatic and rational authority on them. Where the intellectuals, both within and surrounding the university system, had become impotent, the pastors that supplanted them exuded mystic, accrued through their claims to divine calling, and those an endorsement by a higher form of authority. They are drawing on an immanent source of power, manipulative uses of prophecies and prayers, theatrical skills and spectacular displays, and the right dosages of sexual appeal that allow them to dominate the social-political sphere. And so let me skip another part and says that the Pentecostal pastor is closest to what contemporary Nigeria has in place of an intellectual, that quintessential man of learning who generates the idea that transforms society. This clerical authority occurs as an alternative and always trying to override that of political actors, so it exists in tension with the state. Rather than a head-on clash, though, much of what results between the church and state is a calibrated balance of mutual benefits. The pastoral class grants spiritual enablement and moral legitimacy to the political class by generating the ideas that pacify the restless society. The government, in turn, boosts the pastor by using the instrument of political power to give spirituality necessary political efficacy. The prospect that this band of clergy can generate the ideas that will raise society, at least from this book's perspective, appears rather bleak. No doubt the clouds some Pentecostal pastors have amassed, which sometimes transcend their national boundaries, has allowed them to overtake the traditional civic space actors. Yet all the changes keep happening without the concomitant effect of a robust dialogue or even potential social transformations. When you look at it, clergymen as intellectuals is not a historically unique phenomenon. Western history is replete with examples of clergymen who advanced social and political transformations through the power of ideas. And we can think quickly of Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. The histories of universities in the West is also intricately wedded to religion, specifically Christianity. In Nigeria, discourses around nationalism in the 20th century among Yoruba or the Egba intellectuals, as described in the work of Adrian Dries, was very much imbricated with Christianity as a mystical and quasi-mystical device of knowledge-making. In contemporary times, one can also produce the example of somebody like Father Matthew Kuka, a renowned public intellectual who functions as both a man of God and a man of letters simultaneously. So what sets the ambitions of Pentecostal preachers apart? Now, this is a question for Dr. Obadare. Is the thinly veiled appeal with which he treats the men of God functioning the role of men of letters as interloping, a matter of whether these men of God are actually encroaching in the social production of knowledge, or whether it is that the brand of intellectualism they promote lacks progressive and ethical component? In other words, is it about their participation at all, about the quality of the content that they bring into the effort? Notably, Pastoral Power Clerical State is the second in the series of works that Obadare has produced to track Nigeria's political and social culture. The earlier book, Pentecostal Republic, Religion and the Struggle for State Power in Nigeria, similarly gave shape to the Pentecostal spectre that haunts the country's fourth republic. His insightful analysis outlines how new rulership emerged in Africa's yet unstable democracies. The crisis he describes through the Pentecostal politics also beams some critical light on other factors in the polity, the bitter disappointment of democratic governance for people who fought for civil rule, their further search for power and transformative knowledge, and how the Pentecostal religion came to fulfill the yearning for moral renewal in the aftermath of the military government's autocratic order. So insightful was his analysis of the issues that the Pentecostal Republic became the oracle that commentators consulted to understand the intricate ways religion unsettles Nigerian politics. I don't want to go into the intricate details, but the book was very much a part of the conversation about Pentecostalism, religion, and the presidency in the conversations that built up around the 2023 general elections in Nigeria. What the influence of that book and hopefully Clerical State demonstrates is a thirst for understanding the emerging patterns of the nature of politics, power, legitimacy, and the evolution of democracy in contemporary Nigeria. I want to take some issue with Obadare's characterization of spiritual resources like prophecies through which pastors perform their power. He characterizes prophecies as the weapon of the strong, a clearly contradicting the scholarly studies that see them as the weapon of the weak. This is quite an interesting observation because most of the studies that took off from James Scott's Weapons of the Weak tend to refer to similarly weaponized habit through this idea of weak versus strong. And while I agree with Obadare that prophecies can be weaponized, I also think that parsing whether they belong to the strong or weak when depicting Pentecostal politics shows the complications of Pentecostal power and the ambivalent place they occupied within the Nigerian political landscape. Pastors might embody political strength, but they also personify the disenfranchised in their churches as well. The poor or the weak who derive some vicarious power in seeing their churches delights and church leaders exercise so much power also make claims to illusory power, which cannot be merely discounted. Strong and weak fall short of capturing these complexities. And I would suggest that we should just embrace more nuanced terms to characterize or capture the diversity of Pentecostal agents. And another point is that although Obadare portrays clerical power as immense and only short-circuited on a few occasions by women who allege various sexual infractions against the pastors, I also think the authority is far more precarious than he elaborates. For one, Nigeria might reflect all the characteristics of a clerical state, but the state of its cleric is in fact fragile. Clerics rely on the instrument of political power extended in their direction by the secular authority for their power to be powerful. This contingency also means that they operate more as an influence, and the closer they get to those who wield actual instrument of political power, the better their prospect of enforcing their will on the world. So the pastors themselves are locked into a never-ending contention with other social and political actors, similarly struggling for a more potent power that outpaces the fragility of their existing power. Obadare does identify the limit of pastoral power, but in locating it in the occasional disruptions by women laying allegiance of sexual infractions against pastoral elite. So some of these men of God have suffered serious embarrassment because of the boldness of the women calling out their barefaced hypocrisy. And one of the factors that essentially boosted this revolutionary, in quote, impulse is the new media technology. In the age where social media technology has extended the pulpit from the church to the social spheres, where social media influencers and opinion entrepreneurs preach their own version of sermons to society, pastors are no longer privileged interpreters of moral truth. And we can see the example by the tithe debate led by a radio presenter, Ifedayo Larinde or Daddy Freeze, which shook many of these renowned clergymen profoundly, and an intriguing evidence of how much their hierarchical authority has been severely undercut by public commentators who can respond to the analysis of religious veracity with unprecedented immediacy. And so put together, in this age where social media technology has extended and embedded the church pulpit to social spheres, pastors no longer preach to the converted. They deal with what you might call, or what the Bible calls the mixed multitudes. They grapple with the reality that the spiritual verities that used to legitimate them are no longer transmitted within the precinct of the church and can circulate across a broad sphere where they can be vigorously criticized and ultimately profaned. It is thanks to this overexposure that the useless women, and this is a term from the book which I can't elaborate on because of time, who stood up to the pastor could be heard across the social ecosystem. Even Obadare alludes to this development when he noted that there is a global crisis of authority and diminishment of the expert. And while he, of course, referred to the people who embodied rational and scientific knowledge, how is it possible that a global phenomenon of people standing up to authority and expertise could have totally evaded the pastoral figure who also claimed spiritual expertise? Thank you. And Professor, if I have more time remaining, please give me a refund. Thank you.
Okay, I will note that. But thank you very much. Okay, now we are going to listen to First Grace Adeniyi. You have 10 minutes.
Okay. Good evening from here, and good morning or afternoon, wherever else you are. So I will begin my review. I chose to review this book to gain further insights about the salience of Pentecostalism in the lives of my research participants. In my fieldwork on how low-income women in Ibadan navigate everyday life in increasingly precarious times, Pentecostalism was very much part of most of their lives, to the extent that one of my research participants, enticed by the possible role of Pentecostalism in changing her social economic status, converted to Christianity after 4 decades of being a Muslim and now attends the Redeemed Church of God. And more recently, during my research on youth identity and urban change in Ibadan, Lagos, one of my youth informants articulated his refusal to commit himself to one particular church, but rather engages in the continuous search for a church where miracles are constantly happening so that he could be a beneficiary and finally get his breakthrough. After reading this engaging and well-written book, I now have a deeper understanding of the appeal of Pentecostalism and the workings of the spiritual economy. I would like to congratulate and commend Obadare on his thought-provoking book, which is grounded in interdisciplinary scholarship and mostly devotes space and care to explain concepts and elaborate upon ideas and themes. I do think, however, as someone interested in methods, that Obadare needed to devote more time to explaining his methods. For example, what types of interviews were conducted and what was their purpose? How many interviews were conducted? Who exactly are the, quote, the other key players in the Nigerian spiritual industry, end quote. Overall, Obadare makes a compelling argument about how we must closely examine the figure of the pastor and the power they hold to fully understand the appeal of Pentecostalism and the Pentecostal Republic in Nigeria. To this end, Obadare begins his book by explaining the conditions that allow the pastor to exert influence in Nigeria. Prior to military rule in the 60s and 70s, as advanced by Obadare, academia as an institution was a strong pillar of civil society. The academy and professors used to be relied upon to help map out the future of Nigeria and decide relevant policies to strengthen its economy. But military politics led to the delegitimization of academia and the loss of social prestige and authority of the professorial class. Obadare convincingly claims then that the decline in the men, quote, men of letters, end quote, has created a vacuum which the, quote, men of God has stepped in to fill. Now in contemporary Nigeria, academics have been cast aside in favor of Pentecostalism's, quote, coherent theory of history and futurity, including an explanation of the crisis of the Nigerian state and society, end quote, which also conveniently, quote, absolves political actors of responsibility for their actions, end quote. Accordingly, Nigeria has become a clerical state in which pastors have established an aristocracy of wonderment, and this consequent reliance on the men of God promotes the rule of prodigy, which is the antithesis of accountability and democracy. To Obadare, the pastor is a political entrepreneur who is very close to the political process and exercises control, using the instruments of calling, prophecy, and prayer to channel authority and build social capital. Obadare also points out that young people are attracted to pastoring because it, quote, promises instant material rewards, a degree of social respect that the ordinary professional can only dream of, and connections to the political and business elites at national and transnational levels, end quote. While I do not disagree with this attraction to pastoring, I found it a little incongruent with Obadare's emphasis on calling and the interviews he uses to buttress his point about spiritual conscription. How is spiritual conscription reconciled with choosing to engage in pastoring for social mobility reasons? Are there then two categories of pastors, the figure of the pastor that the book focuses on, and those, quote, facing the danger of permanent consignment to the social margins, end quote. Obadare posits the pastor also exercises power within the erotic sphere through their location at the center of the Nigerian Pentecostal erotic economy. Obadare highlights that the pastor has erotic power, that is, access to and seeming control over the bodies and sexual organs of his congregants, and is also the object of the gaze through his eroticization. Obadare argues that the eroticization of the pastor is ultimately inalienable from Pentecostalism's moral project of producing a new kind of male, one that is effeminized, thus allowing the pastor to emerge as an idealized man, theoretically available to every woman. Admittedly, I wasn't fully convinced by this claim as it required more evidence beyond theorization. Do male congregants think they're effeminized, for example? Obadare also points out that pastors assist in the conduct of conduct through erotic power, a form of phallic subjugation whereby the pastor's erotization is leveraged to sway the faithful, inducting them to adopt normative ways of seeing and acting, and as such, program their agential reflexes. This part is a bit unclear to me. Given the examples provided in the chapter, there is nothing seemingly normative if we're talking about gender norms and heteronormativity about the examples. So, for example, the effeminizing men, the rubbing of men's genitals, and asking women not to wear underwear to church. Also, while reading, I thought this chapter could benefit from a more in-depth engagement with sexuality studies, thus enabling further exploration into sexual citizenship and heteronormativity, and allowing the possibility of queering the consumption of the pastor by effeminate men. Further, I couldn't help but wonder, though Obadare is not interested in the figure of the female pastor, what this Pentecostal erotic economy would look like in a female-led church. Is it only the man of God that is afforded panoptic power? In Obadare's case, erotic masculine power, which then privileges a particular type of sexual citizenship. For example, the circulating stories of a supposed female pastor in Ghana telling a male to suck her breast for healing comes to mind. Finally, I'm curious about what it means to not afford agency to the faithful in the Pentecostal erotic economy. What I mean is, perhaps the faithful desire to consume the pastor sexually, as a way of being closer to God, if indeed he is a man of God, and perhaps desire on their own part to approximate some sort of power through what could be considered a divine act. Obadare's final substantive chapter centers on women who rebel and resist pastoral power. I thought that this chapter required more elaboration to strengthen Obadare's appellation of two of the women as feminists. Obadare writes, quote, "I'm willing to go out on a limb and defend Stephanie Otobo as a feminist, an imperfect one to be sure," and later refers to Kemi Oluloyo as a feminist icon. It's unclear how Obadare defines feminism and whether there's such thing as a perfect feminist. And Roxane Gay's book, Bad Feminist, comes to mind here, as well as other scholarship illuminating the diversity of feminism. More so, the supposed defense seems to be missing or not clearly stated. What makes her a feminist? Why did Obadare decide to call her a feminist? To be sure, and by way of conclusion, what makes Obadare's book powerful and relevant is his concern about the future of Nigeria, which he's afraid is bleak because, quote, "clerical assurances about future security," end quote, "and clerical dominance over social life preclude deliberative politics and reason." It seems then that a restoration of the intelligentsia, which by the way is gendered male throughout the book with no explanation, will become Nigeria's saving grace. Although beyond the scope of the book, I'm a bit wary of this valorization of reason and the seeming binary of reason versus spirituality, faith, which brings to mind colonial projects of modernity and its afterlife in the post-colony. For example, the coloniality of being and the colonial.
Thank you so much, Grace. And it feels that we lost you in the last few seconds. The connection was a bit weak, but I think the substance of your presentation was clear. Thank you so much. And,
Sorry, did you say you lost me?
yes. Maybe the last couple of sentences.
The last couple of sentences, yes.
Yes. You are still frozen.
Conclusion? Am I frozen?
Yeah. Go ahead and your sentence. It appears it's okay now.
I think we can hear you now.
You can hear me?
I think
okay, so I'm not sure what you heard last, but
go ahead.
You know what? I'll just copy and paste the last paragraph into the chat box.
I think that should go.
And then we can move on to something else.
Okay. Now, Professor Afolayan. I hope he's not frozen.
He's not. He's muted. He has to unmute.
Professor Afolayan, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good.
Okay, now. Yeah, you can begin your presentation.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Let me start by appreciating Professor Obadare for this provocative and provoking book. I think, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think Professor Obadare will be aware of some of my arguments, some of the tracks that I took in examining and reviewing the book. Let me sincerely appreciate him. I told him some time ago that I was going to write a review of the Pentecostal Republic. And then before I could get to it, the Pastoral Power Clerical States came out, and I had to struggle to digest the two. And I think I've been digesting it for a while. And I'm not going to do the kind of brilliant review that Professor Adelakun and Professor Omiake did. Well, I'm simply just going to outline my worries in the form of some questions that aligns with how I have taken Pentecostalism, especially in its engagement with Africa's post-colonial predicaments. One, I think that
yeah, it's the network. It's been raining here. For those of us, it's raining non-stop. So I believe that's why.
Like previous speakers have said, okay? And I think that there is a lot more that needs to be done to be able to make that claim. If a second edition of that book is to be written, can you hear me?
Can you start the argument again?
Can you still hear me?
We can hear you now. We can hear you now, but we lost you a bit.
Okay.
If you put up your video,
okay.
If you put up your video, it will be better.
Okay, maybe I should let me put up the video.
Yeah, because of the network issues. Yeah.
Yes,
better.
Exactly. You're right. Thank you very much. So, one, there are two arguments. The first argument that I am taking issue with is Professor Obadare's argument that the pastor has overtaken the intelligentsia, in the public sphere of the Nigerian society. And the second argument that I want to take issue with is the relentless negative representation of Pentecostalism and Pentecostalism's role in the post-colonial space of the Nigerian society. So one, I think that a lot more, as has been noted, a lot more needs to be done in terms of sociological analysis, to be able to convince us that within the public sphere of the Nigerian society, the pastor has indeed overtaken the intellectual. I think it is more apposite to talk about the ongoing tension, in an attempt by not only the pastor, not even only the intelligentsia, but also celebrities, in vying for, the moral imagination of the Nigerian society. We have a whole lot of, class that are in contention. We cannot say that the pastor alone has that ascendancy when the Nigerian youth, for instance, are finding moral preference, with, the celebrities. When the Yahoo boy is also holding his own within the context of, the moral understanding of the Nigerian society. So that is my first argument, that we will need a whole lot of social methodological understanding of how Professor Obadare came to that argument in the first place. I mean, I was surprised to see that, when people have failed to get some job, what they turn to is pastoring. That is surprising. Or that a professor, in order to be able to, achieve some kind of social prominence, would prefer to turn to pastoring. That needs a whole lot of understanding, a whole lot of arguments to be able to, to make it a tenable argument. So that's my first argument, that made it very, very, very frustrating for me to come to terms with Professor Obadare's arguments. The second argument that I'm going to be making has to do with the nature of the Nigerian society and the role that Pentecostalism plays in it. And here, I would have loved to ask, or I hope that Professor Obadare eventually will tell me or tell us why is anti-clericalism is an impatient one. I mean, why will he be impatient with, a phenomenon that has captured the imagination of almost all of us, okay? Rather than carefully, understanding its dynamics, carefully understanding, its trajectory. Professor Adelakun has mentioned the issue of, lumping a whole dimension, of Pentecostal pastors together. I don't think there's a sense in which, for instance, we can lump Adeboye, and Pastor, I've forgotten his name now, of the Boko Peace House fame. Beliakoni, thank you very much. I don't see the sense in which both of them can be lumped together, in terms of, capturing the Nigerian state or capturing public policy or politics. Okay, so my argument is to say, to begin to try to understand Pentecostalism, for instance, in terms of post-colonial world making. What role does Pentecostalism play? Can we gain anything, for instance, by simply just looking at the pervertibility, the perverse dimension of Pentecostalism, which Professor Obadare relentlessly, articulated and examined and argued against, compare with the capacity, and I'm quoting this from Professor Nimi Wariboko, the capacity that Pentecostalism has, to enable new beginning in some significant ways. How do we achieve a secularist understanding of Pentecostalism in a post-colony where even Pentecostalism itself is trying to make sense of what is going on? Where, like Professor, again, going back to Professor Adelakun, when you enter the social media space, you see the demystification of the Pentecostal pastor. You see celebrity taking over. You see Nigerian youth trying to follow the celebrity rather than the pastor, or challenging, a scriptural interpretation of the Bible. So my argument or my question is, how do we begin to understand the role that Pentecostalism can play? Can we say, for instance, that Pentecostalism is instigating an awareness of the urgency of secularism? Can we say, for instance, whether Nigeria is a post-secular state? If it's a post-secular state, can Nigeria be post-secular before it is secular? We have to begin to understand all this and what Pentecostalism is bringing on the table, rather than just dismissing it or painting it in negative light, the way Professor Obadare has done. So those are my tracks. Those are the questions that I would love to get answers to. What role? How do we situate Pentecostalism between its positive capacities and its negative, manifestation? How do we understand that, rather than just seeing all Pentecostal pastors or Pentecostalism itself as one monolithic phenomenon, rather than just breaking it into its various and varied dimension. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was also another brilliant presentation. And despite the technical glitches, Professor Afolayan, you are still able to keep to time. that was the philosopher.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Okay. Now we'll go to Professor Vicky Brennan.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be part of this panel, and as always, to participate in the LEGO Studies Association. I think my comments will probably be, very brief and a bit informal, so I apologize that I didn't send them to you in advance, Prof. But Whenever you publish a book, which is perhaps too frequent for my ability to keep up with it, I'm always excited to read it. I always learn so much, and I really, both enjoy the quality of your writing as well as your argumentation. I come to understand Nigerian politics as well as the relationship between religion and politics more generally better through your writing. I mean, I can say as far as this book, even reading the footnotes is a pleasure. Like, I got so much out of this book. So it's clearly written, it's so tightly and convincingly argued. But that being said, and perhaps in line with some of the other comments that have been made already, I do have 3 things that I would like to sort of ask you to think about with me, and to push you a little bit. And maybe you might be already feeling like this panel is a bit of we're all like Pentecostal apologists or something like that, but we're all going to push you on that line. So the first thing I'd actually like to hear a bit more, you say a bit more about, is the way, like you talk, you're talking about this trajectory from the man of letters to the man of God, but I'm actually wondering if you could say more about how the military general acts as a fulcrum between those two. You discuss it a bit, especially when you talk about the power struggle between Babangida and Vatsa, but I think you could say a bit more, because the military general, he's a third figure whose political authority derives from force, placing the might of the state at the center of power and authority. And yet, such figures also demonstrate a kind of charisma, whereby they justify their claim to authority beyond just having the weapons, right? And so I'm thinking, especially here in the Nigerian context, of the importance of ideas of discipline and how they shape a particular imaginary, not just of the state itself, but also of the polity. Military discipline certainly represents a kind of conduct that is a notable part of Nigerian civil life, whether it's the youth service or whether it's the weekly or monthly sanitation exercises or other things, right? These are ways that policing and other efforts to shape behavior are affected, that also then go on to impact civil society, right? I mean, often a number of people would say, oh, it was better when we were under a military dictatorship because then there was less chaos. And also perhaps less freedom, whatever's meant by that, right? So the military general lurks as a shadow or a negative image of the intellectual and the pastor, and their relationship shifts in relationship to the power shifts that you are describing in the text. But there's 2 examples in particular, I think, that suggest there's more to think through. One, of course, is the transformation of Obasanjo from military leader to born-again penitent, and how that becomes the originary moment of the Fourth Republic, right? And then also, and I'm going to talk more about this, and it's been mentioned already, the use of social media that inspires youth movements, both the protest against tithing, mentioned by Dr. Adela Kun, as well as protests against policing and the SARS movement that Dr. Yeku has written about, and other youth movements that decenter or at least rethink the role of religion in civil society in Nigeria more broadly. And again, the military man acts as a specter, I think, in both instances. And so it would be good to know a little bit more about that. Okay, with apologies. So my second point or comment has to do with how you theorize your material via social theories of power and authority. And this is where you go beyond offering an analysis that's particular to Nigeria, but also offer a grounded response to political theory more broadly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Weber. And so the pessimism of your conclusion, especially your concern that the Nigerian disenchantment with intellectuals has contributed to a reenchantment of the polity and an emptying out of the possibility of political action, transforming contemporary Nigerian democracy into what you describe as rule by prodigy. This makes me think about Weber's argument at the end of the Protestant Ethic, where he's shown how a particular political economic formation shaped by frugality and hard work emerged due to religious ideals such as predestination. I'm rehearsing the argument of Weber's Protestant ethic, right? And so for Weber, the argument was that these religious ideas would fall away through processes of rationalization, transforming what he called the light cloak of the Puritans into the iron cage in which we're all part of, even though we don't hold those religious ideas. So in many ways, your argument complicates Weber's, especially his insistence that rationalization and bureaucratization would move religion from the center of political life. As you have shown, this is not the case for Nigeria, but I still wonder if it's useful to think of this image of the iron cage, in this case, to try to think through the ways out of the dilemma for democracy that you describe at the end of the book. And I'm just going to quote Weber. This is one of my favorite Weber quotes. He says, "No one knows who will live in this cage in the future, or whether at the end of this tremendous development, entirely new prophets will arise, or there will be a great rebirth of old ideals and ideals, or if neither, mechanized petrification embellished with a sort of convulsive self-importance," right? And that's where Weber kind of undercuts his own teleology. And I'm wondering if we can do that to maybe push against your teleology as well a bit. So I want to ask whether there's any room for shifting away from this iron cage of the cleric that you've described. Are Nigerians stuck in this cage? Are there ways out of it? We have to, again, I'm going to just repeat, we have to think beyond Weber, because secularization, like the previous commenter said, is not really a possibility. Is Nigeria post-secular? Was it ever secular, etc.? Religion cannot be bracketed out from other domains of civic life, whether in Nigeria or everywhere. The United States is facing its own issues along these regards as well, right? So I want to ask, is there a way to imagine religion too, Pentecostalism specifically, as being potentially ameliorating of these forces? I think in your text, there's some hint of this, especially in your discussion of how so-called useless woman, the so-called useless woman challenge, or at least complicate the authority of the pastor, which then you say that, and then in the conclusion, it's like, nope, we're stuck in the iron cage of the cleric, right? But I'm also thinking again of Dr. Adelekun's work about the challenges to pastors about tithing, and how social media offers spaces for people to actually critique the pastor's authority. So to put this in another way, can there be an ethical Pentecostalism that brings Nigeria out of this predicament as you've described it, right? Okay, and so my last point, and again, I'm going to apologize for being so theoretical, but my last point, I'm going to turn to another classic text in sociology to ask, what might Durkheim offer to your analysis here? It seems clear, whether you get there via Durkheim or performance theory, or even evolutionary theory, that humans need collective experiences to better connect themselves to their social groups. They need to be moved. Ideas are sometimes less important than the feelings that are aroused by one's connection to them. So again, this is where the figure of the military general serves as a useful foil, because certainly nationalist rituals, such as military parades, help to inspire forms of social connection. And if we think back to moments of Nigerian national unity before the Fourth Republic, we might see how events such as these help to reinforce this kind of nationalist sentiment and political connection, like the Nigerian team winning the World Cup, or even the pride of holding Festac 77. So things like that, that were not necessarily nationalistic in terms of the military, but were still able to arouse these kinds of sentiments of civic connection. And it seems like in this regard, the man of letters, for whatever reason, ultimately failed to inspire. And religion, especially Pentecostalism in its spectacular forms, have taken this place. So can we imagine, in your hypothetical conclusion, a way for this energy to be channeled for good? Or alternatively, can we imagine what a resurgence of Nigerian nationalism might look like, one that would move the polity from under the sway of the pastor and instead towards perhaps a more ethical obligation towards each other and towards the civic? And I think this is, again, where youth movements in particular, and SARS or other online youth movements that are connecting themselves to political projects outside of Nigeria might be a way to think about that as these ways of generating that kind of feelingful connection to each other. So I will stop there. I think I've probably not used all my time, but I hope that at least is useful for thinking through some of the implications of your argument. Thank you.
You actually used exactly 10 minutes. Okay, so thank you very much, Vicky, and we'll now listen to Professor Labiodun.
Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. And of course, it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion. The book, Pastoral Power, Clerical States, Pentecostalism, Gender, and Sexuality in Nigeria. Of course, it's no doubt that it's an interesting book. It is a clear and lucid account of the state and stage, for me, of Pentecostalism in Nigeria. In Nigeria, Pentecostalism it's the rave of the moment. It's the rave of the moment, no doubt about it. And as far as I am concerned, is either you are a part of Pentecostalism or you don't have a space. Now, the focus of Obadare's book, the author, is this issue, I quote, the decline of the man of letters and the ascendancy of the man of God. And I asked the question, decline? Probably he will need to expatiate on this. I'd read the book. I really can't see that. For me, I actually see a transition here. And I think at a particular point in time, the author did mention that what we have today, basically, we have prominent men of God who I believe at one time or the other were men of letters, and some still wear the two caps. So I ask the decline for me, probably when you are doing a review, when you are coming up with a second edition, probably we will rethink that word decline. Now, also, I also looked at the foreword written by Professor Olupono, and in line with what he wrote, I also asked the question, what is responsible for the rise of Pentecostal pastors to national prominence in Nigeria? Why are talented and charismatic young Nigerians embarking on the vocation of pastoring? These are questions that need to be answered. Now, I go to the chapters that actually caught my fancy in this book. The Beauty and the Beast, that is in your chapter 3. The Beauty and the Beast. Quite interesting. And then I also enjoy the sexuality twist, which is very intriguing. For me, just like your book is trying to depict, it shows the control and the power the pastors wield over their congregants. From your write-up, massaging of pennies and not swearing on this to church. This is interesting, and I say here, sounds crazy to me if you ask, but it is definitely power control, and this is also showcased by the author. However, do you think, I'm asking a question now, that there's something peculiar about African cultures regarding sexuality, as claimed in your book by Rachel Sprung? I'm also asking the same question. And also, there's something I also noticed. Camille is an American transgender. There's a point in your book which you refer to her, well, as his. I would want you to actually find out what pronoun she would like to be identified by. His, her, they, them, whichever works for her. Now, I totally agree with the sexual escapade as just to boost the pastor's social standing and celebrity status. Some of the examples that you gave concerning the pastors, yeah, at times one wonders why this is happening, because nothing seems to happen to the pastors at the end of the day, but rather they get more popular, and we see even their female congregants standing up for them. Another chapter that also caught my fancy is chapter 4. And I wonder why the word useless women. And I have decided to title that chapter, The 4 Useless Women with the 4 ego trip or useless pastors. The pastors also are as guilty as charged. They are, of course, just like the book says, control, power. They are trying to exert their powers on their congregants. That seems to be what is happening here. But perhaps if we have a scientific data, like we have statistics, we have percentages to back up this thing, like someone said that you would not want to put Adeboye and some of these pastors on the same pedestrian. No way, they are not. So some of them are young, and as far as I'm concerned, youthful exuberance. That is why they go into some of these things. And on a lighter note, and to wrap up, I wonder why you have Oyedepo on your cover page. I'm also a Pentecostal Christian. So why didn't you use me? I'm prettier than Oyedepo. Or probably Adeboye. Why Oyedepo? I'm just wondering. And then I also looked at your footnotes. I think that's it. Yeah, footnotes. And you said something about the initial topic or the initial title that you had for this book was My Pastor Says. And you know what? I agree with you. This book actually should have been titled My Pastor Says. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you get my last statement?
Yes, I believe we did.
Yes,
Yeah.
Prof, we did.
Talking about the fact that you should have titled the book My Pastor Says. Thank you.
I got it. I heard everything you said. Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And before Professor Obadare makes his response, I just want to maybe offer one or two sentences in light of the points made by the previous speakers. I believe
Prof, you're also about to join my assailant.
No, I'm not trying to assail you. I'm just trying to maybe recap.
I'm just joking.
Without repeating their arguments. But I think what I got from their comments is a challenge to binarity in your analysis. Men of letters, men of God. And I want to, both Professor Adelakun, Professor Folayan, Professor Ogunyakin, actually everyone said that. And I want to link this to the way you characterize the rule by men of God, that is the rule by prodigy. And if you mean by prodigy rule by exception, I think it was Carl Schmitt, the German social theorist or legal theorist rather, who defines a sovereign as one who rules by the state of exception, something like that, who decides the state of exception. That is, so which means a sovereign is by definition a prodigy in this regard. And what I want to propose or argue is that perhaps it's the men of God, the rule by prodigy is not unique to the men of God, that this is what you actually have in Nigerian social space. And Professor Adelakun talks about your maybe underplaying the agency of the congregation themselves. So that the question is, to what extent is the penchant of the Nigerian people to expect a sort of messianic result, a magic-like result from all members of the ruling elite? It predisposes them to function or to project this rule by prodigy trait, a sort of charismatic attitude. So when you have a new president in place, people expect the president is going to become the new Messiah. An undergraduate student in a university expect that degree offered by his professor will enable him or how to get a job. So everyone is raised to the level of a Messiah in his or her own professional class. So, and although this expectation does not always translate into results, that is what actually happens. So the simply characterizing or as giving this attribute to men of God alone, to me, I believe maybe expresses your own bias towards the tendency to stigmatize or to be too harsh on Pentecostal tradition generally. Whereas there is a wider phenomenon going on in Nigeria where everyone wants to act big in his or her own professional class. So I want to add that, and that this tendency to act in that way is not an attribute of the ruling elite alone, but the Nigerian people themselves expect the professionals to act in that way. So there is that dynamic going on between the root and the root, whether in the religious sphere or in the secular sphere. So let me just add that, and then I invite you to make your response to the comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Look, thank you so much, everyone. I should start with Professor Elesami. I'm not trying to embarrass you. Professor Elesami has been, one of my most, important supporters over the course of my career. We've exchanged tons of emails. He's written numerous references for me. But there's something that people don't know. We come from the same town, but we've never met in person, which is really, really interesting. I've never met him in person, and he's been so supportive. So, Prof, I really, really appreciate your support. I appreciate everything you've done for me, for my family, for my career. Thank you. My sisters, my brothers, Professor Brennan, Professor Bushaki, whether you like it or not, I think we're friends now. Professor Labiodun, Professor Adelakun, Professor Laniyan, and the man who is hiding, Professor Yeku. I'm grateful for this opportunity. As I was telling someone the other day, I said, if there's a faith that is worse than being criticized, it is being ignored. I'm truly grateful that you've not ignored me and that you've engaged with me. To have one's work criticized is to be taken seriously. It's truly an honor for me that you've taken time out to respond to my work. I'm not going to try and answer all your questions. I take them, all your criticism, in good faith, and trust me, you're going to see references to some of what you've said in some of my future work, and I'm going to continue to reflect on some of your criticism. Having said that, let me see if I can respond to a few of some of those comments. Man of letters, man of God, both are heuristics, and heuristics have this particular property. They're not. I'm not saying they're to be taken at face value, but they do admit of contradictions, right? So I use them. So when I say man of God, I'm saying there is this particular sociological type. It's there. I'm positing it. It's real. But it doesn't mean that you won't find departures from it. And the same thing with man of letters. And I think I said somewhere in the book that when I say man of letters, one, I'm not just saying man, right? I also mean woman and all of that. But there are two, when I say man of letters, I'm also admitting that the genealogy has become uncertain, that person rooted in a particular topography, European topography, 18th, 17th century, that insofar as that era is no longer with us, that distinguished, retiring, pastoral man of letters is also gone. But I'm holding on to it, and you see the connection to my impatient clericalism at some point. I'm holding on to it because without it, I think I really can't do my analysis. And I said, look, so far as I'm referring to a man of God, I'm not just talking about people based in the universities. I'm talking about people who are committed to the use of reason in everything to do, in everything they do. And that insofar as at a particular period in Nigerian histories, in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, in terms of their entire prestige economy, that man of letters called all the shots, was widely respected. Insofar as he presided over that era is now effectively over. But since there is also no vacuum in any society, something stepped into the vacuum vacated by the man of God, by the man of letters. And that's the person I'm calling, again, heuristically, the man of God. My book is about that transition. So something else that I mentioned that hasn't come true, but I mean, just as part of my own defense. So I also mentioned that insofar as that man of letters was supreme, his ideology was Marxism, right? And I say that without any prejudice one way or the other to Marxism as an ideological project, but to say insofar as one was an academic or a man of letters in Nigeria at a particular era, one was also, broadly speaking, Marxist. And that when the Berlin Wall collapsed, leading to the eventual misfortune and the degradation of Marxism as a project, it also coincided with the departure of the man of letters from the scene. And that Pentecostalism effectively replaced Marxism as the dominant ethos. So that when you think about the role Marxism used to play in Nigerian public and intellectual life, that's the role that Pentecostalism plays now. That's one of the core arguments I'm advancing in the book. The question Professor Brenner asked about the role of the military in this is extremely interesting. And I think that also came through some of the questions my other colleagues asked. And I think and I try to go into detail on that in the book. And the point is that one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, why the man of letters had to vacate the scene is due to military rule. And it was not incidental that the military went after the universities in Nigeria. The military, the universities were the very epitome of the threat from civil society that the military rightly identified and went after it. And I write also as a participant, talking methodologically now, right? I also write, when I write as a participant in all of this. I've attended more religious services, Christian religious services, that I would like to attend over the last 20 25 years. The first time I wrote about that, I sort of tried to lay the groundwork for this project was in my article in the Review of African Political Economy, where I think it was published in 1997, right? 2007, was it 2000? I've forgotten now. Anyway, Pentecostal presidency, it was a question mark. At that time, I was looking at what was going on under Obasanjo, and I was trying to understand the then emerging formation. And it occurred to me that a shift had happened, especially in terms of the relationship between religion, and politics in the country. And then I started keeping track of what was going on. So methodologically speaking, I was there, I experienced it, but my style, and I say this, to Professor Ogusaki, not because I don't think your observation is correct, but my style has always been to allow you to trust me to distill everything I've learned from the field without necessarily saying I spoke to 25 people. That method is fine. That approach is great. But once I finished my PhD, I took it upon, I said, I'm just going to rely on my own judgment. And when people read what I write, I hope they will see that I've done due diligence, that I've done the interviews. So when I say that, when I quote someone, for instance, or I quote people, I'm expecting to say, yeah, I've done that. I've interviewed people, I've attended church services, I've spoken to pastors, I've been driven out of churches and all of that. I've not been arrested like Professor Adelakun. That's a different thing. But I've been around the block a few times. So methodologically, I've been involved. But you're absolutely right. Maybe there's a way, there's a place for methodologically saying, there are the number of people I've spoken to, there are the circumstances and all of that. I'm trying to, I flagged some comments, so I'm trying to. So the question about gender, this is from Professor Ogunyakin. Is it only men of God who are allowed access to the bodies of congregants? What about the women? I say from early on that I am interested in male pastors, right? Which is not to say that there aren't women pastors out there. I state it very clearly. But I think it will be doing a disservice to the phenomenon itself, especially to the dominant role played by male pastors, not to center them in this, right? And to say that what I'm talking about is a specific sociological type, the man of God, emphasis man. When I say it, I'm not necessarily dismissing women, so there's a whole project, to be done. And I'm sure, people have done a lot of work on, the female pastors and all of that, but that's not what I'm interested in. And one of the reasons why I also had to do that, and I made that clear in the book, is that if you think about the most important pastors in Nigeria now, for good or for ill, they're male. The reasons why they're all male, right? We can go into that, but we can't neglect the fact that all those pastors are male. And for me, it's central to what I'm trying to actually the work I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to understand in terms of how those male pastors have displaced the authority of the intelligentsia and how they've become the go-to authority for members of the political elite. Is Olunloyo a feminist? That's a good question. Look, okay, so there aren't perfect feminists, right? It was important for my analysis that insofar as any woman raised her hand against the figure of the male pastor, that I had to accept the feminism of that person. If they may not have read Judith Butler, right? They may not have read Simone de Beauvoir. They may not have, but to the extent that they are asserting their agency as women, that's what's important to me. Now, of course, there are all kinds of complications, right? As I said, Olunloyo is not your ideal, I'm not even sure she's your ideal agent in terms of anything. She has all her own complications, and I'm alert to that. But I'm also taking her seriously as a rebel, right? As someone who's challenged the authority of Pastor David Ibiyeomie, suffered for it, was made to bend the knee, and then eventually she also did a 360 degree. So again, I'm saying that not because I don't think your point is valid about feminism. For me, it matters less, whether someone is actually steeped in the tradition of feminism, that the fact that, okay, somebody is actually a woman in a particular context, a context in which men dominate, and that woman is saying, no, I'm not going to. So this is where the uselessness, come from. And you can see the appeal to Sarah Metro, useless women. When I say useless women, I say that to endorse them, right? I'm saying they are useless. So if you see the opening paragraph of that chapter, if a man calls you a useless woman, it's because you've not bent the knee. You've not done the things that women are supposed to do in a male-dominated society. Of course, there are also, as I say, useless men. Anyway, okay, something on which I think all of you agree. This is Professor Afolayan, my negative portrayal of Pentecostalism. And I think Professor Brenner also might have mentioned that look, I have nothing against Pentecostalism as such, underlined as such. On the other hand, what I'm trying to do is to say that insofar as you are a student of Nigerian politics, Nigerian society, there is something standing in your way to understanding that you have to recognize. That thing is Pentecostalism. And that since 1999, since we started the Fourth Republic, it's been the most important religious and social movement in Nigeria. To the extent that I am negative in my portrayal of it is because of the evidence that I see before me. I'm not negative, I'm just realistic. I'm just seeing what is before me, and I'm putting it within, particular sociological traditions, and then telling you this is what is happening. I'm not the one committing the acts that I attribute to Pentecostalism. Everyday Pentecostals are the ones engaging in those things, not me. Nor am I dismissive of, other traditions and other tendencies within the broad church, if you will, of Pentecostalism. Professor Yeku won't let me hear, about, all these other little traditions that and then if you look at, my portrait of portrait, so you ask the question, what has Daddy Gio got to do with what's the name of the Iliakane? So that polarity, and I get it. My answer is very simple. They function within the same ideational paradigm. They are both presiding spirits, in what I'm calling rule by prodigy. Look, I said I think in chapter 2, the pastor as political entrepreneur, that not all pastors are created equal. And I try to draw small portraitures, trying to highlight significant differences between different pastors. I totally get it. There's a whole spectrum, right? That the GO has his own personal tics. Oyedepo has his own personal tics. But to the as far as I'm concerned, they are all involved in the same social and epistemological project, insofar as they enable what I call rule by prodigy. To that extent, if you accept my own hypothesis, the differences between them or among them matter less than the fact that, theoretically speaking or conceptually, you can quote and unquote, put them in the same box. Have I written off the intelligence? Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. It seems Professor Adelakun has two devices open.
Oh, okay. Can I continue?
One is echoing. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Have I written off the intellectual or the intelligentsia too early, Professor Afolayan? I don't think so. I'm actually just recognizing the reality out there. So look, one example I gave in the book is, if you ask the fundamental question, who do people turn to? Who do they ask questions? Where for them is the source of authority? Who would you listen to? Professor Adelakun, Professor Afolayan, University of Ibadan, or Daddy Gio, right? Professor Afolayan is a good man, but he has no chance. Nobody will take him seriously because he does not have the prestige or the charisma or the aura, or as I'm claiming, the authority of Daddy Gio. That is the truth. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when the man of letters was regnant and dominant, things were flipped, right? It wasn't that then that people did not take pastors seriously, but people understood that if you needed anything in terms of, the future of society, in terms of knowledge and all of that, you went to the man of letters. And my point is that insofar the man of letters was regnant at that time, it was also because universities, Nigerian universities, were also the kind of institutions that they were. That the frustration with that transition is the basis of my impatient anti-clericalism. It's not because I don't want the clericy. It's not because I detest Pentecostal pastors, even though some of them earn our detestation. It is because I want a restoration, an intellectual restoration. I want a situation where the universities, the institutions that all of us here operate within, I want them to be back to the position of authority that they used to enjoy. And it's not just because I used to work in one in Nigeria or here. It is because of what universities themselves represent, right? You can't have the kind of society that we are going to have, democratic, prosperous, ebullient, and all of that, without having, a truly functioning university system. That is the source of my impatient clericalism. And that is why, Professor Ogunyaki, I'm committed to reason. Reason for me is universal. There is nothing, for me, coloniality of being is a contradiction, right? Historical colonization is a specific project. Nobody's being can be colonized, right? I can be part of a society that was colonially subjugated. But once that ethos is displaced and it's been displaced in an African context, I am free to be whoever I want to be. Reason is not a Western possession. It's a universal possession. It's used by human beings. Is the inalienable endowment and property of the individual everywhere, whether in Lesotho or Mongolia. There's nothing about it that can be quote unquote colonized. This is one of the reasons for my impatient, anti-clericalism. Are Nigerians stuck? Professor Brenner, fantastic question. No, right? No society by definition can ever be stuck, right? Insofar as society is the work of human beings, insofar as human institutions are produced by human beings, then no society by definition can ever be stuck. Not even, look, the one country now where if you look at it on the surface, like, oh, I've given up. There's nothing can happen here. Haiti. I can't, because of my own, original principles, give up on Haiti. Because insofar as I admit that society's problems are created by human beings, I'm also ipso facto committing myself to the extension, to the logic, which is that only human solutions can be had for human problems. So Nigerians are not stuck. However, and another reason why they are not stuck is there's a history to the emergence of rule by prodigy, at the center of which is Pentecostalism, right? Insofar as that history is open to us, and insofar as we know why people are drawn towards the power of Pentecostalism, it also means that using the power of reason, we can begin to think about solutions to the problem that take us away from that. That is not an anti-religion argument. It is an anti-enchantment argument. It's saying, look, in order for Nigeria to have a chance, or other African countries where Pentecostalism has occupied the kind of social role that it currently occupies, in order for us to have a chance, we have to undo some of its worst excesses while admitting that religious people mobilizing religious arguments do have a role to play in the thickening of the public sphere in all these places. Okay. I think I'm going to stop. I've been talking too much. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your engagement. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to pose this question to all the panelists because none of them raised the issue in their comments. And this is the interface between Professor Obadare's project and the larger religious pluralism in Nigeria. In the context of the politics of arithmetic in Nigeria as to which of the two religions Islam represents is the more dominant. So all the panelists have kind of made the observation that Obadare seems to be anti-clerical, anti-Pentecostal. But then one could flip the argument around and say there is a sort of irony, an unstated assumption in his reading of Pentecostalism, which is that he seems to be reading Nigeria political space through the eye of Christianity, and therefore giving Christianity more dominance, more ascendancy over its cultural competitor. So Pentecostal Republic, then you can have the other side saying Islamic Republic. Clerical power, imam's power. So which of the two is more empirically accurate with respect to Nigeria? So my argument to the panelists is that is Obadare as is it as anti-Pentecostalism as he doesn't want to admit his.
I think we lost Professor Ilesami, right? Can you hear Professor Ilesami?
Well, I can hear him.
Yeah.
I still hear him.
Yeah.
Or did I lose everybody?
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay.
I think we lost Professor Ilesami, right?
No.
Oh,
It must have been your own network.
okay. I'm sorry. Okay, please. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Is Obadare anti-Pentecostalism, or is he hiding his friendship with Pentecostalism by actually giving by trying to project this religion over its cultural competitor? This is to all the panelists.
Prof, if you don't mind my interjecting, we're wrapping up in about 7 minutes. We have questions in the chat. I know the panelists will reflect on this very important question, but perhaps you go to the chat, take one or two. Professor Obadare gives some brief responses, and then we can wrap up in about 6 minutes.
Thank you. I didn't even notice that. Okay, so there is one question from one Dr. Edouin who said he hasn't read your book, but do you only have problem with men of letter turned men of God? Did you consider men of God who become men of letters. So,
at the risk of appearing to want to sell my book, I will say actually consider that relationship. So I'm going to encourage my colleague to purchase a copy of the book. It's available on Amazon.
okay. So, and then there's another question. Why are pastors forcing young people who are committed in the religious activities to take up pastoral duties without considering their availability for other official engagement, something like that? So I think that's the question.
I don't think young men are being forced to become pastors. Actually, that's not my argument in the book. My argument is that given the constraint of the labor market in Nigeria, and given the enhanced status of the pastor within what I'm calling a prestige economy, you want to become a pastor. You want to become a pastor for so many reasons. One is that the licensing is easy, right? In terms of, because all you have to do is to say, I'm a pastor, and then you become a pastor, right? And then, you get your way in so many ways. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's my argument that it's one of the reasons why people give the anecdotes in the book about, what happened to me when I was going to Nigeria. Was it at Gatwick or Heathrow? I've forgotten the particulars now, where there was this long line of people. And, from all the geles and fillers, I knew that these were my people. And I was wondering what was happening. There was such a long line. And it was Daddy G.O. there, right? Everybody was cursing. I was like, wow. So this is what it's like to become a famous Pentecostal pastor. So my point is, if you see young people turn to pastoring, it's because of all the opportunities, for self-actualization, for wealth, but also for what I'm calling, becoming someone, right? Which has been the crisis in Nigeria, post-structural adjustment over the last, 30 years or so. So that for young people, such is the crunch, right? That there are only a few things that you can do. You can join a political party. You can travel out of the country. You can, if you are lucky, you can find a job in one of the corporations. But other than that, what do you do? Or you can do Yahoo, or you can become a pastor.
Thank you. Comment from the panelists to what was Obadare has said, or to the question that I posed, or final comments, final reflections?
Well, it's not a comment, it's not a question, it's not a reflection. It's just a very small observation that the prestige economy of becoming pastor has fallen now, and the new one is skit making, right? Like, rather than be a pastor, just be a skit maker now. It's like what they say now, every Yahoo boy that cannot do that, there is a front for that business. Go make a skit and then you are rich. It's the new front, the frontier of prestige.
Yes, President Adelaku. But have you also noticed that many of them, their fake names are Pastor? Have you noticed that? Pastor Oli Agba, Oli Arole, Atiro, Pastor Remote.
And there's a lot around church, drama.
Exactly. That's my point.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm thinking of starting one.
Right, but don't all these skits about pastors push against the totality of the pastoral? Like, they're making fun, they're poking holes in this kind of authority of the pastor in these skits, and Wole Ogba has so many about the pastor taking advantage of women and things like that. So they're
demystifying the pastors.
Yes, they do. Hence making the reign of the pastor more and more precarious. But in doing so, they are also acknowledging the regnancy of the pastor. They are not making fun of the professor. They are making fun of the pastor. They are basically telling us we live in a world of the man of God. That's my point.
I suppose Dr. Folayan is relieved that they are not making fun of
They are not making fun. I think they should be making fun of Professor Folayan in particular.
Philosophers, make fun of philosophers.
I think for me, I think that in such a short while, you will need to write a second edition of that book, and you have to take into consideration the social media as a place where, you know, whether we like it or not, so many other things are coming to the celebrity, you know, are taking their turn, you know, on that space and in the moral imagination of the Nigerian millions of Nigerian youths. I think
so that's the conclusion of the trilogy, right? So if you read my paper that came out in Africa last year, it's titled On the Theological Theatrical, and it's about the fusion of popular culture with Pentecostalism. Social media is part of that. That's the conclusion of the trilogy.
We look forward to that too, actually.
And I want to thank everyone again for your brilliant contributions, for your patience. We are rounding up now, it's 30 more seconds to go, so we may be cut off anytime. Thanks you again for accepting the invitation to be on this panel. I hope the conversation will continue even beyond this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my colleagues. Thank you all. I'll follow up with, you know, thank you emails. I really, really appreciate your work. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dr.
Thank you,
Dr.
everybody.
for organizing.
Thank you
Enjoy the rest
for
of
this
the day.
opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. You're most welcome. Professor Labioda, bye.
Bye.